"What is this? Are you serious?" The officer's voice boomed across the garage. His hand slammed against the metal counter, rattling scattered wrenches and tools. Customers froze mid-motion, eyes wide, as the uniformed man's gaze fell on the mechanic standing calmly behind the counter. "Do you even know how this works?" he sneered, laughter dripping with arrogance. "I've been doing this for years. You're joking, right?" The mechanic didn't move. His hands were stained with oil, his uniform smudged, but his posture remained relaxed, unshaken. Years of work in garages like this had taught him one thing: patience and precision beat aggression every time. He studied the officer. The smug grin, the overconfidence, the sense of untouchable authority, and waited. Then, without a word, he walked outside and popped the hood of the officer's patrol car. Within minutes, the officer would be the one staring in disbelief, forced into a position he had never imagined. And everyone in the garage sensed it. "We're so close to hitting 100 subscribers. Help us reach that milestone and keep bringing these powerful justice stories to life. Hit subscribe now and turn on notifications. This is True Black Struggles. Stories where injustice meets power, and the truth always wins." The garage sat on the corner of Millbrook Avenue and 5th Street, sandwiched between a laundromat and a hardware store that had seen better decades. Its sign, Marcus Auto and Repair, had faded from fire engine red to a dusty coral, the letters slightly misaligned from a windstorm 3 summers back that no one had ever gotten around to fixing. But the people in this neighborhood knew that sign. They trusted it the way they trusted their grandmother's remedies. Not because it looked impressive, but because it worked time and time again without fail. The man behind that sign was Marcus Webb, and Marcus Webb had never once let a customer leave with a problem he hadn't solved. Inside the garage that Tuesday morning, the air hung heavy with the particular perfume of hard work. Motor oil and metal shavings, a faint trace of burnt rubber, the ghost of 100 engines that had passed through these bays. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, one of them flickering slightly near the back wall with a rhythm so consistent it had almost become background music. 2 cars sat on lifts, a burgundy minivan and an older model Civic with a cracked exhaust manifold. Marcus had been nursing back to health all morning. Beside the service counter, a rotating wire rack held bottles of wiper fluid and a sun-bleached display of air fresheners shaped like pine trees. A small television mounted high on the wall played a morning news segment nobody was really watching. There were 4 customers present when Officer Dale Pruitt walked through the door. 2 of them sat in the small waiting area, a row of mismatched plastic chairs along the wall, and 2 more stood near the counter, waiting on estimates. Devontae, Marcus's 18-year-old apprentice, was wiping down a torque wrench near the tool cabinet, earbuds in, head nodding faintly to something only he could hear. It was an ordinary morning. The kind of morning that doesn't announce itself as significant until it's already too late to look away. Officer Dale Pruitt was 37 years old and had been with the Millbrook Police Department for 11 years. He was the kind of man who entered every room as though he'd already won whatever argument might take place inside it. He was broad-shouldered, with a jaw that seemed to always be set slightly tight, and eyes that moved quickly, cataloging, assessing, judging. A habit built from years on patrol that had long since bled into every other corner of his life. He wasn't a cruel man, not in the way people sometimes are, not deliberately or consciously. But he was an entitled one. And entitlement, left unchecked, has a way of looking exactly like cruelty to the people on the receiving end of it. He had brought his patrol car in because it had been running rough for 3 days. A hesitation on acceleration, a faint shudder when the engine idled at a stoplight. His department's fleet mechanic was out sick, and his sergeant had told him to find somewhere local to get it looked at quickly. Someone at the precinct had mentioned Marcus Auto. Pruitt had driven over expecting, if he was honest with himself, to be in and out in 20 minutes. He had not expected to walk into a garage run by a man who looked, to his eyes, like he barely belonged behind the counter. Marcus Webb was 44 years old, and he had the kind of face that gave nothing away unless he wanted it to. He was a solidly built man, not tall exactly but grounded, the kind of presence that took up space not through volume but through stillness. He had grown up 12 blocks from this garage. He had taken apart his first engine at age 11 on his Uncle Raymond's driveway. The two of them crouched over a disemboweled Oldsmobile on a Saturday afternoon, while the rest of the neighborhood moved around them like a river around a stone. His uncle had pointed at each component with a long-fingered hand and said, "You learn these parts like you learn the alphabet. You learn them until they're part of you, because one day knowing them is going to matter." Marcus had taken that lesson and carried it into every room he'd ever worked in. He had certifications stacked in a manila folder in his desk drawer, ASE Master Technician credentials across 8 categories, a manufacturer certification for electrical systems, a diagnostic endorsement that most dealerships in the county couldn't match. He had trained 3 mechanics who now ran their own shops. He had rebuilt an engine from raw components as a demonstration at a community college automotive program. He knew what he was doing. He had always known what he was doing, and he had long since stopped needing anyone else to confirm it. When Pruitt walked in and announced that he needed his patrol car looked at, Marcus had approached the counter with the same professional calm he brought to everything. He asked a few diagnostic questions. When did it start? How long had it been since the last tune-up? Any warning lights on the dash? Pruitt had answered with a tone that carried a low current of impatience, as though Marcus's questions were an inconvenience rather than a professional necessity. Then Marcus had said, calmly, that he'd need to run a full diagnostic scan and inspect the engine before he could give an accurate estimate, and that it might take an hour or so to get a clear picture of what was going on. That was when something shifted in Pruitt's posture. His chin lifted slightly. His eyes moved around the garage and came back to Marcus with a look that carried the particular weight of a man who has decided, without evidence and without examination, that the person in front of him is not worth his time. An hour, Pruitt had said. For what? It's a patrol car, not a spaceship. Can you even handle something like this? Marcus had paused. Just a beat so brief most people wouldn't have noticed. But Devontae noticed. He pulled one earbud out. One of the waiting customers, a woman named Gloria who brought her a cord in every 6 months like clockwork, looked up from her phone. "I can handle it," Marcus said simply. And then came the moment that cracked the morning open like a fault line. The hand slamming against the metal counter, the booming voice, the sneer that pulled across Pruitt's face like a curtain being yanked aside to reveal something ugly behind it. "What is this? Are you serious? Do you even know how this works? I've been doing this for years. You're joking, right?" The laughter in his voice was not the laughter of someone who found something funny. It was the laughter of someone performing dominance, someone used to the sound of their own authority filling a room and pushing other people smaller. But Marcus didn't go smaller. Inside his chest, Marcus felt something he had learned, over decades, to neither suppress nor surrender to. It was a hot, clear thing, like a flame burning in a glass lantern, present, controlled, illuminating. He had felt it the first time a customer at his first job had asked to speak to the real mechanic. He had felt it when a dealer had questioned his diagnostic finding and then, 3 days later, called back to confirm he'd been exactly right. He had felt it in 100 different garages, 100 different counters, 100 different sets of eyes that looked at him and saw something less than what he was. And every single time he had made the same choice. Not because he was passive, not because he lacked the words to respond, but because he understood at a bone-deep level that the most powerful thing he could do was simply be undeniable. Let the work speak. Let the knowledge speak. Let the truth speak in a language that had no accent, no color, no uniform, just competence, clear and unassailable as mathematics. So he didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He looked at Dale Pruitt for one long, quiet moment, long enough for Pruitt's smirk to flicker, just slightly at the edges, and then he walked outside and popped the hood of the patrol car. Behind him, the garage exhaled. Gloria set her phone face down on her knee and leaned forward slightly. Devontae put his second earbud away entirely, setting the torque wrench down on the cabinet with a soft clink. The 2 other customers at the counter exchanged a glance, the silent language of people who have witnessed the opening move of something significant. Pruitt followed Marcus outside, hands on his belt, chin still elevated, projecting the confidence of a man who didn't yet know he had walked into a classroom. The hood of the patrol car rose on its prop rod to reveal an engine bay that told Marcus everything he needed to know within 30 seconds. Ford Police Interceptor V6, roughly 4 years on the body, but the engine had clearly been running hard. He could see the residue patterns around the battery terminals, a faint corrosion bloom on the negative post, the kind of slow creep that starts small and then one day simply decides it's finished cooperating. He could see the wiring harness running along the firewall and immediately identified a section where the insulation had worn thin, rubbing against a bracket edge with every vibration. Amateur eyes would have looked at this engine and seen nothing obviously wrong. Marcus looked at it and saw a timeline, a story, a set of causes and effects written in grease and wear and time. He already knew what was wrong. He already knew how to fix it. And he already knew something else. Something that Pruitt, standing behind him with arms crossed, could not possibly have anticipated. "Gonna take more than a glance," Pruitt said from behind him. His voice had retreated somewhat from its earlier boom, but the condescension remained, a residue that clung to every syllable. "I don't have all day." Marcus said nothing. He reached into his chest pocket and produced a small LED light, clicking it on and directing the beam along the wiring harness with the focused attention of a surgeon. His other hand traced the wire routing with 2 fingers, following it from the alternator toward the fuse block, pausing at the worn section, noting the precise point of contact with the bracket. He moved to the battery, examined the terminals, pressed a thumb against the corrosion and felt its texture. Soft, widespread, significantly advanced. He straightened up, looked at the engine one more moment, and then walked back into the garage without a word. Pruitt followed him, a crease forming between his brows. "So, what's the verdict?" "I'll need to run the diagnostic scan," Marcus said, already moving toward the computer terminal near the service bay. "Give me a few minutes." Pruitt exhaled through his nose. He pulled out his phone and leaned against the counter, the posture of a man performing patients he didn't feel. The customers in the waiting area watched him with the kind of careful, sidelong attention that people develop when they've learned that direct observation draws unwanted notice. Gloria had put her phone away entirely now. She was watching Marcus instead, and her expression was the quiet, steady look of someone who has bet on a horse before and knows, in her marrow, that she bet right. The diagnostic scan confirmed everything Marcus had already seen with his own eyes. Fault codes for intermittent low voltage at the ignition circuit, secondary codes suggesting resistance anomalies in the primary wiring harness. The scan told the story in numbers and codes, but Marcus had already read it in the physical evidence, the way a fluent reader doesn't decode letters one at a time but absorbs whole words, whole meanings in an instant. He printed the diagnostic readout, clipped it to a work order, and wrote his assessment in the clean, precise handwriting he'd developed over years of documentation. "All right," he said, approaching the counter where Pruitt stood. "Here's what you've got." He laid the work order on the counter and walked Pruitt through it, the wiring short, the corroded battery terminal, the interplay between the two that was causing the intermittent failures. He explained it clearly, without condescension, the way he explained everything to every customer regardless of their technical background. He watched Pruitt's eyes move across the work order and noted the slight tightening around them, the look of a man encountering information that doesn't fit the narrative he'd already written. "That's going to be a few hours of work," Pruitt said. "I need this car today." "I understand," Marcus said. "I can get to it as soon as I finish the vehicle currently on the lift. Estimate is 2 to 3 hours, depending on the wiring condition once I get into it further." Pruitt looked at him. Something moved behind his eyes, the old instinct, the practiced authority, searching for purchase. "You sure you know what you're doing with electrical? Because the last thing I need is someone making this worse." The garage went very quiet. Devante, who had been moving toward the parts cabinet, stopped moving. Gloria looked at her hands. Marcus looked at Pruitt for a moment that stretched just long enough to carry its full weight. Then he said, "Yes, I'm sure." 2 words. Flat, even indisputable. Not defensive, not aggressive. Just true. The truth sitting in the room like a tool placed on a table. Here it is, use it or don't. Pruitt left his keys and went to sit in the waiting area, settling into one of the plastic chairs with the stiff discomfort of a man unused to waiting. He pulled out his phone and began scrolling, sending the signal that he was done engaging. But the garage was not done with him yet. The garage had its own plans. An hour and 20 minutes later, Marcus had moved the patrol car into the primary service bay. The problem with the wiring, once he got into it, was more extensive than the initial inspection had suggested. The insulation breach was longer than he'd estimated, and the chafing against the bracket had created a secondary grounding issue that was intermittently touching off a cascade of electrical irregularities. It was the kind of complex, layered problem that required patience and systematic thinking to unravel. Marcus worked through it methodically, tracing each wire, testing resistance at multiple points, mapping the fault like a detective reconstructing an event from physical evidence. He worked in silence, mostly, occasionally asking Devante to hand him a specific tool or hold a light at a particular angle. Devante did so without needing instructions repeated, a quality Marcus had identified in him early and cultivated carefully over the past year. From the waiting area, Pruitt occasionally glanced toward the service bay. The first few times, his expression carried impatience. By the third time, something more like uncertainty had begun to creep in at the edges. The look of a man beginning to suspect that the situation is more complex than he assumed, and that complexity might not be resolving in his favor. At the 90-minute mark, Marcus came to the service bay door and said, "I'm going to need you to come take a look at something." Pruitt set his phone down and rose, crossing the garage floor with the walk of a man reassembling his authority after an unexpected intermission. He stopped beside Marcus at the open hood. "The wiring issue is more extensive than the scan showed," Marcus said, pointing to the laid-open section of the harness. The insulation peeled back to reveal the damaged conductor underneath. "This section here has been grounding intermittently against this bracket. That's your hesitation and your shudder at idle. But look here," he directed the LED light further along the harness. "There's a secondary breach further up, near the ignition relay. These two issues together have been creating a feedback loop that's also started affecting your battery draw." Pruitt looked at the wiring. His jaw tightened. "How long has it been like this?" "Based on the corrosion progression at the terminal and the wear pattern on the insulation, my estimate is 6 to 8 months. Whoever was servicing this vehicle missed it. Possibly twice." Silence. The significance of that landed in Pruitt visibly, in the way his shoulders absorbed it. A subtle drop, a recalibration. 6 to 8 months. He had been driving this car, relying on this car, for 6 to 8 months with a compounding electrical fault that his department's own mechanic had failed to identify. And this man, this mechanic he had sneered at and questioned and dismissed, had found it in under 2 hours using his eyes, his hands, and his knowledge. "Can you fix it today?" Pruitt asked. His voice was different now. Not dramatically different, not transformed, just quieter. The boom had gone out of it. "Yes," Marcus said, "but I need to order one section of replacement harness from my supplier. I can have it here in 40 minutes. The repair itself will take another hour after that." Pruitt nodded. He said nothing else for a moment. Then, as he turned to go back to the waiting area, he stopped. His hand rested briefly on the side of the patrol car, and something passed across his face. A calculation being run, a verdict being reached in the private court of a man's conscience. "You've done this kind of repair before?" he asked, and the question came out without its armor. Just a question. A real one. "Many times," Marcus said. Pruitt nodded again and walked back to the waiting area. Gloria, who had witnessed the exchange from her chair, met Marcus's eyes as he passed. She gave him a single, small nod, the kind that said everything without saying anything at all. Marcus gave her the faintest echo of a smile and went back to work. The replacement harness section arrived 38 minutes later. Marcus installed it with the focused efficiency of a man who had performed similar operations so many times that his hands knew the sequence almost independently of conscious direction, but whose mind remained fully engaged regardless, because the mind of a true craftsman never fully delegates to habit. He soldered the connections with care, sealed each junction, rerouted the harness away from the bracket that had caused the initial damage, and secured it with proper loom and fasteners so the problem could not recur. He replaced the battery terminal, cleaned the posts, applied anti-corrosion compound. He ran the diagnostic scan again. Clean. No fault codes. He started the engine and let it idle for 4 full minutes, watching the readings, listening to the sound of it. Smooth, even the hesitation entirely gone. He called for Pruitt. The officer walked back to the service bay and stood beside Marcus in front of the running engine. The sound of it was immediately, obviously different from the rough idle it had been producing when Pruitt had driven in that morning. Even a non-mechanic could hear it. Pruitt heard it. His eyebrows shifted slightly upward. "Start her up. Sit in it for a second," Marcus said. Pruitt got into the driver's seat. He turned the key. The engine caught immediately, cleanly, none of the hesitation that had been plaguing it for days. He sat in the idling car for a moment, hands on the wheel, and from where Marcus stood at the hood, he could see the officer's profile through the windshield. He could see the particular stillness of a man processing the distance between where he started this morning and where he had arrived. Pruitt stepped out of the car. He stood in front of Marcus for a moment. The garage had gotten quieter. The television on the wall was off now. Gloria and the other remaining customer had both drifted slightly closer without quite realizing they'd done it, drawn by the gravity of what was unfolding. Even the flickering fluorescent light at the back of the shop seemed to have steadied itself. "It runs clean," Pruitt said. "It does," Marcus said. Another pause. Pruitt looked at the ground briefly, then back up. "You know what you're doing," he said. And in the stripped-down simplicity of those 5 words, delivered without ornamentation or qualification, there was an acknowledgement that reached back to the beginning of the morning and revised it. It wasn't an apology precisely, but it was something. It was a man arriving, however reluctantly, at the truth. Marcus looked at him steadily. "I know," he said. "I always did." The silence that followed those words was not hostile. It was the silence of something having been settled. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. The way a balance scale settles when the correct weight is finally placed on the correct side, and the arm comes level and there's nothing more to argue about because the physics have spoken. Pruitt paid his bill without complaint. He paid it, in fact, without a word beyond confirming the amount. He signed the work order and accepted the carbon copy receipt that Marcus set on the counter. He picked up his keys. And then, at the door, he paused, one hand on the frame, his back partly to the room. He didn't turn around fully. He said, to the door more than to anyone in particular, "I shouldn't have talked to you like that earlier." The words came out rough-edged, the way words do when they're not accustomed to being said. But they came out. Marcus, behind the counter, let them land. He didn't rush to fill the space they left behind with absolution or reassurance. He let the officer carry the full weight of what he'd said and what had preceded it. Then he said, simply, "Appreciate that." Pruitt left. The patrol car pulled out of the lot in a straight line, engine running smooth, and within moments it was gone from sight. For a few seconds, nobody in the garage said anything. Then Gloria let out a slow breath through her nose, the kind of exhale that is also a verdict, and said quietly, "Well, just that one word." But it was a full sentence. Devante, leaning against the tool cabinet, shook his head slowly with a look of genuine admiration. "Didn't say a word to him the whole time," he said, almost to himself. "Didn't have to." "That's right," Marcus said, pulling a clean rag from his belt and wiping his hands. "The work said it." He went back to the Civic on the lift. The exhaust manifold wasn't going to fix itself, and there were 2 more vehicles on the afternoon schedule. The morning had been what it had been, and now the morning was over, and there was more work to do, and Marcus Webb was exactly where he had always been. Present, capable, and entirely unbothered by the opinion of anyone who had not yet taken the time to understand what they were looking at. But the garage buzzed for the rest of that day with something that doesn't have a simple name. A feeling that lives in the space between dignity and justice, that hums in the air when something that should have always been true is finally demonstrated in a way that can't be denied. Customers who had witnessed the exchange told others. Gloria mentioned it to 3 people in the parking lot of the laundromat next door before she'd even gotten to her car. Devante posted nothing, said nothing publicly, but carried the lesson of the morning with him with the care of someone who understands they have been given something valuable. And Marcus, working steadily into the afternoon with oil-stained hands and a mind running clean and precise as a properly calibrated engine, thought about his Uncle Raymond. About a driveway in summer, an Oldsmobile laid open to the sky, a long-fingered hand pointing at parts and a voice saying, "You learn them until they're part of you, because one day knowing them is going to matter." He thought about all the days between that driveway and this one, the dismissals, the doubts cast from outside, the quiet hours of mastery built in the absence of recognition. He thought about how none of that had been wasted, how every hour of it had been deposited into something real and solid and irrefutable, how knowledge doesn't need anyone's permission to be true, how competence doesn't require validation to function, how the truth, when it finally speaks in a voice that has no need to be loud, because it was never competing, it was simply waiting. The Civic's exhaust manifold was replaced by 4 o'clock. The afternoon's second vehicle, a pickup with a failing alternator, was diagnosed and scheduled for the following morning. By the time Marcus locked up the shop at 6:15 and stood in the empty garage for the brief, private moment he allowed himself at the end of every workday, the moment of simply being in the space he had built, surrounded by the evidence of what he did and who he was, he felt the particular quietness of a man who has nothing to prove because he has already proven everything that matters. Outside, Millbrook Avenue moved in its evening rhythm. Kids on bikes, a radio playing from an upstairs window, the smell of someone grilling a few doors down. The faded red sign above the door caught the last of the afternoon light and held it for a moment. Marcus Auto and Repair, before letting it go as the sun moved on. Power isn't in a uniform. It never was. It lives in the hands that know what they're doing, in the mind that has done the work, in the patience of a person who understands that the truth doesn't need to argue. It only needs to be demonstrated. And sometimes, the most powerful statement a person can make is simply to be undeniable. To show up day after day in a faded sign garage on a corner in a neighborhood that the world has sometimes overlooked, and to be so irrefutably, so completely, so quietly excellent that even the people who walked in ready to doubt you walk out having received the only education that ever really sticks, the kind you didn't see coming until it had already changed you. That day, an officer walked into a garage carrying his assumptions like a weapon and left carrying a lesson like a weight he hadn't expected. And a mechanic went home the same way he always had, knowing exactly who he was, exactly what he knew, and exactly what that was worth, which is everything. Which has always been everything. If you loved seeing justice served, subscribe now and turn on notifications. This is True Black Struggles, stories where injustice meets power, and the truth always wins. Be part of the movement. Never miss a single story where the truth finally prevails. Next week, a local official tried to humiliate a black veteran, only to discover the veteran wasn't alone. You won't believe what happened next.